The European Union is 28 different European nations with the aim of integrating the continent and their 550 million citizens closer together, both politically and economically, through aspects such as the single market and the customs union. The United Kingdom joined the European Union in 1973 and helped shape its dynamic today, although recent concerns regarding immigration and a lack of independence created a rise in nationalist parties, leading to a referendum being held on the 23rd of June 2016, in which the Leave campaign won 52% to 48%, resulting in Parliament's planned withdrawal from the European Union. The result in turn led to a stark drop in the value of the pound, stalling growth predictions and creating uncertainty amongst businesses and the public, raising many questions over the future. Since then, there has been a political struggle over the approach and terms to Brexit, with Parliament failing to agree to the terms on the UK's future relationship with the EU and many questions over our future. This news report will look into three questions. First, evaluating worker suitability and discrimination as a result of gender, race, nationality and age. Next, we look to evaluate the effects of European integration as an obtaining and retaining social capital in the UK, before evaluating the labour market and what Brexit will mean to the highly skilled workforce.
Thank you, Hayden. And now to our specialist, Hafsa.
Thanks, Jacob. First of all, I'm going to talk about how immigration affects labour demand and supply. Immigration affects labour supply because it increases the pool of workers in certain sectors of the economy. Similarly, it may increase labour demand as migrants expand consumer demand for certain goods and services. That is, immigration may increase competition for existing jobs in certain occupational sectors, but it can also create new jobs. In general, workers in low-skilled occupations are expected to face more competition from migrants because the skills needed for those jobs are easier to acquire and less specialised. Secondly, immigration can also expand the demand for labour and therefore create new jobs. This is because there is not a fixed number of jobs in the economy. So the so-called lump of labour fallacy, as it is known. Migrants increase the demand for goods and services, and employers may then increase production in sectors where migrant labour is used. Employment restrictions that come with certain types of immigration status may make migrants the more suitable and easier candidates to retain in jobs that offer low wages and poor employment conditions. This is because these restrictions can limit the choice of employment for workers. For example, migrant workers with temporary visas may have no other choice than to take jobs with low pay. The immigration requirements also make it hard for them to change their jobs. Therefore, they may be willing to tolerate worse employment conditions than legally resident migrants due to their very limited rights. As indicated by the research I've done, employers are generally aware of the economic trade-offs and other trade-offs that migrants are prepared to make by accepting poor employment conditions and wages by the standard of their host country. So naturally, employers would hire migrant workers to maximize their profits. An example of this is with the Filipino community, where their wages are generally lower in the UK because they were unprotected due to being undocumented. So they were not entitled to any benefits, even legally, so they had no protections and no rights. According to employers, they were also considered as the cheap substitutes for British workers, according to the article I read by Anderson. This then means that the suitability of employees for certain types of jobs is sometimes decided categorically. Sometimes employers use their own experiences or socially meaningful stereotypes to interpret the behavior of certain nationalities. And this may be done when recruiters have incomplete information about the candidates. Research shows that new migrants are also willing to accept jobs with significantly lower skill requirements compared to their actual skills because of their conflicting frame of reference. This then creates high quality workers for low wage jobs. This impacts the labour market negatively because this leads to an extreme shortage of high skilled jobs. Just half of workers report that their skill levels are well matched to their roles, with over a third, that is 37%, reporting that they could cope with more demanding duties. This may result to poor job satisfaction, lower earnings, and worse career progression. Overskilled workers are also much more likely to earn considerably less than their well-matched counterparts, with previous research finding that there are large wage penalties associated with being overskilled. Also, they are more likely to want to quit their jobs, with 22% compared to just 12% of those who are well matched. And if they then quit their jobs, that increases unemployment as a whole in general. However, according to to CIPD survey, 59% of employers may also hire migrant workers due to short supply of candidates with the required experience, and 56% will hire them due to short supply of the skills required for the job. Employers also argue that they seek migrant workers due to their demand for specific skills or knowledge related to countries, which includes learning foreign languages. An example of this is the demand for migrant workers in ethnic restaurants, where employers insist that migrant workers have not learned the skills but also have the knowledge of customs and language used in the workplace, that is like restaurants. Although this is more common with low-skilled jobs rather than high-skilled ones. Also, 18% of employers argue that they hire migrants because they are more committed to their work, 10% hire migrants because they are more productive, and only 5% hire them due to lower wages. Although it is discovered that 5 times as many employers recruit low-skilled workers to reduce labor costs than employers recruiting high-skilled workers. In July 2009, there was up to 2.47 million unemployed workers. This was particularly high for those in lower paid jobs. Therefore, it can also be argued that the fear of increased competition and long-term unemployment has driven employees to settle for jobs and employment conditions that they may not have accepted during high times of employment and economic growth. So it may just not be for migrant workers but for workers in general, because they're desperate to get jobs, so they would accept anything lower than their actual standards. However, in conclusion, there is still no systematic evidence for this in the UK, as the area is still under research. So it might just be, yes, migrant workers are hired due to the stereotype, but also it might not be the case because everyone is desperate to get a job and will settle for less than what they would get actually. Okay, I'll pass it on to Will here to talk to me about his own experience about this matter.
Okay, thanks, Hafsa. So actually in 2016, I applied in the labour market for a bricklaying job. And with the right qualifications and skills and experiences I have, unfortunately I didn't get it. And it was inferred indirectly that it was passed on to East European migrants. And I don't want to use it as a scapegoat, but afterwards I could see the workforce and the majority of them was made up of East Europeans, and it's kind of inferred that it's down to commitment and they're harder working than I was.
So then basically it's just based on the stereotype that they're harder workers, they're much harder workers than British people, and that was why they were given to the job and not you.
Yeah.
Alright then, thank you very much.
Thank you, Hafsa. We are now live with 2 of our correspondents, Chan and Hayden, who'll talk about impacts of Brexit upon the social capital.
Social capital refers to those factors of effectively functioning social groups. That include things such as understanding the interpersonal relationships, a shared sense of identity, a shared understanding, shared norms, shared values, trust, cooperation and mutual exchange. So why is it important? Social capital allows us to build on these relationships everybody needs, helping improve our quality of life, helping each other with the problems that we encounter. Whether that be through jobs, recreation, spiritual life or transportation, we are enhanced if we are united as one and support each other in solving our problems together.
So how do you think European integration improves our quality of life?
Firstly, through the customs union. So this has allowed freedom of movement. So a migrant can be defined as somebody who settles in a place that is different to that of their birth, usually in pursuit of an improved quality of life or work. So if you look at the UK, we've got 3.7 million European migrants living in the UK in 2017 and 1.3 million UK people living in the EU. So this has allowed people to move across the continent wherever they wish. You've also got tourism. So the UK has European destinations, and 9 out of 10 are the most popular holiday destinations for UK citizens. So it's allowed us to kind of go where we want to go on holiday cheaply, easily and conveniently. If you look at human capital, so human capital can be defined as the skills, knowledge and experience an individual has attained, in which in turn adds to their value to the nation. So if you look at this through higher education, we are allowed to get their experts or NHS filling skills shortages. So what benefits has human capital given us? So just under 7% of the UK's workforce are EU migrants, helping us fill skill shortages in industries such as NHS, as we mentioned. However, as a result of Brexit, The Office of National Statistics highlighted a decline in EU migrants working in the UK, and up to a third of EU migrant workers see their future away from the UK, representing a vast loss in human capital. For example, there was a 91% fall in EU midwives post-Brexit, and the EU workforce, making up 17% of the university staff, was up to a third which could be leaving. If you look at diversification, so there's over 24 official languages of the EU, and they include all major religions. So this is and this has been a big key to why London is now over 300 languages spoken. So it's kind of allowed people from every culture to come into one. And we're better together, so experts from across Europe as opposed to those just of our home nation, as we mentioned, through human capital. Collaboration programmes, so we're now part of the European Court of Justice, European Parliament, European foreign policy, through international trade as a whole block as opposed to being on ourselves. European defence policies, diplomacy, as we lately seen with Russia. And if you also look at security, so we've got Europol, we've got the European Passenger Database, which helps us identify terrorists, SIS2, which provided the UK police with 10,000 reports of criminals alone last year, based on information we received from our EU counterparts, which we wouldn't get outside of EU integration.
Yep. So on the other side of the coin, we have one of the main problems that we've come across is the unexpected amount of immigrants. So it was predicted at the time of post-EU enlargement of 2004, UK would see around 5,000 to 13,000 immigrants per year. However, in 2006, it was revealed at around 550,000. So because of this reason, the demand for housing in the UK has gone up, which has led to obviously the rise in housing prices. So unaffordable housing is a problem, especially for first-time buyers, more medium and lower income families. This increase has led to basically the decreasing rate of housing ownership. So recently, another problem is the Brexit. Because of Brexit, we've seen the amount of hate crimes go up in the UK. EU integration has brought in more diversity, as you said, but it has also enabled free movement. Normally, this is a good thing. However, as we saw in the case of Paris terrorist attack, the suspects were able to easily transfer over to a different country, which was Belgium. Although this is a single case, it has created a fear in public in general. This has led to increasing Islamophobia. This has also obviously has a very big impact on the British Muslims living in the UK, with them being unsure of their futures really. The divide is creating more of tension and teaching some of us that it is really okay to be scared of a normal British Muslim.
Yeah, very interesting point, thank you.
Thank you, Chan and Hayden. I'm currently joined by Will.
Thank you very much, Jacob.
Cheers. We'll consider how graduate markets might be impacted by the procurement of companies into the European Union. But first of all, according to the labour market theory model, in ideal conditions, the employment level in relation to the wage is directly linked to the perfectly competitive market. The suppliers are defined as the companies who are the demanders of the labour force, and the employees are the supply of the labour market. Demonstrated by the St. Andrews Cross, the equilibrium is satisfied by the accurate supply in relation to demand of the labour force. However, understanding the dynamics of the graduate market, it is emphasized that the excessive supply of labour might ultimately lead to low wages and result in overqualified workforce. Back over to you, Will.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I'd also like to talk about Brexit and the employment relations between employer and employees and how complex it is. So organisations are encouraging people to speak up about their own concerns, and employers are encouraging the opportunity to talk more about the power and the support of diversity in creating an inclusive and safe culture where everybody can be their true, authentic self. Employers are planning ahead to understand what kind of capabilities and skills are needed in the future for graduates. Employees would be most worried about job security. This is because Brexit offers outliers and unknown variables to people's plans and livelihoods. For the employees, the nature of the business culture would change due to the worry about procurement of the organisation to another country. This would be, through cost cutting, as we've seen with the likes of HSBC. So the whole employee engagement landscape in the UK has got a lot more complicated. Employees perform best when their leaders can give them clarity and certainty about their future, and animating a purpose relating to both their organisation and their job from which they can derive meaning and responsibility. Hard though it may be, managers across the UK need to redouble their efforts to nurture, maintain, and grow levels of engagement among employees who currently have more questions than answers. So that brings me on to my second topic that I'd like to talk about, is the trade unions. So the free trade agreement, firstly, and most trade negotiations are held in secret, with governments subject to intensive and expensive lobbying from transnational corporations, with little or any access for unions, citizens, or even politicians. Secondly, most new generation trade deals now focus on opening up to public services to competition from overseas companies. This allows the opportunity to win big contracts, usually based upon reducing labour costs through reduced employment and cuts to terms and conditions. So a prime example of this would be the privatisation of NHS in specialised units. So this brings me on to my next topic, so the advantages for graduates in the labour market. So we've got figures from the Institute of Student Employers, which represents many big organisations, and they've actually taken on 7% more graduates this year, and this is 31% have taken on year-long placements of students, with 10% taken on more interns. Employers were asked about the main concerns as well, and only 15% of them were worried about the implications of Brexit. The unemployment rate as well for graduates leaving after 6 months has fell by 5.1%. This is the lowest since 1977. And employment in general has risen by 3%, as 4,500 more graduates have found a job compared to last year. The proportion of unemployed graduates in the professional level has increased by a further 4%.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
I will talk more about the negative impacts of the Brexit. So before the referendum, high flyers found top employers were aiming to hire around 22,000 graduates in the UK. However, by the end of the year, only 19,000 were actually recruited. Out of 13 sectors, 8 hire fewer graduates. Almost a quarter of graduates as well have changed their future career plans as a result of Brexit, according to the research. Future graduate may be exploring further options to work in the EU or become an expatriate. And the reducing number of skilled qualifications jobs had resulted in more than half of the UK workforce experiencing overqualifications in their jobs. 12.8 graduates went to work in retail, around 2/3 of them were in jobs below professional level, consequently leading them to take lower skilled jobs. And most importantly, failure or lack of success in the job market follows the individual and shifts the responsibility from the state. Quoting, difficulties attracting graduates to certain industries have been a feature of the graduate labour market since the recovery from the last recession began, as explained in the source of employability of the graduates.
Okay, how does European integration help to create jobs?
So if you look at tourism, for example, up to 24 billion is invested into the economy annually through tourism. European countries make up over half of the 40 million visitors we get, 21.5 million. Jobs that we can't fill, so almost double the EU nationals working in the UK compared to that of the rest of the world, and taking 9% of doctors, 5% of nurses and 16% of dentists are from the EU. But if you look at May's deal, with the pay cap being at 30,000, which many nurses don't earn over, they wouldn't be allowed in the EU, creating a massive skills shortage. And from my own personal experience, 1/3 of all lectures that I've had at university have been from the European Union, so that's created jobs and it's also provided me with the best possible education. Jobs that we don't want to do, so over 500,000 EU workers are working in low-skilled jobs. This can be anything from dirty work in labouring, fruit picking, kitchen jobs, which we see ourselves as too proud to be. And it's also created loads of jobs, so up to 4 million jobs are linked to EU exports. The UK has won 1/5 of all research and development grants for security since 2007, totaling £8 billion being invested, and we've got the highest level of vacant jobs since records began in 2001 as a result of our economy being so strong.
Yep. Well, overall, the immigrants were from various different backgrounds, but most were considered to be poor and low-skilled, which is supported by the Labour Force Survey between 1990 and 2014. The survey also states that in that time, the share of wealth owned by the top 10% in the UK increased by around 10% too, so this is directly related to the influx of immigrants coming in. This has actually led to the annual increase of 12% in income inequality in the first half of just this decade. So do you actually think that European integration helps solve problems?
Yeah, I think we're better together. I mean, if you look at the definition of social capital, it is all about relationships and solving problems together.
Yep.
Something that European integration has allowed us to do.
taking the Mediterranean problems with immigrants and refugees recently, it's allowed us to solve that as a continent, as opposed to that just being solely down to Italy, for example, to solve, which wouldn't be feasible. Security and terrorism, as we mentioned earlier, so it's given us access to Europol databases, SIS2's database scheme. It's given us over 10,000 hits on possible terrorists and criminals last year due to access of data from across the continent. The EHIC scheme, so it's given us free healthcare anywhere in Europe and kind of the Northern Ireland border. So that was a point of big tension initially, but as a result of freedom of movement and free-flowing integration across Europe, that's kind of helped deal with that integration. And finally, access to Galileo satellites, which has provided us things with navigation and communication, which kind of given us things that we wouldn't be able to fund ourselves. So working amongst ourselves, Europe is our largest economy, both imports and exports, so it's created vast jobs and it's done vast things for the country.
Yeah, so in summary, I think we can all agree that European integration has led to a rise in immigrants, bringing a range of problems. However, these drawbacks are outweighed by the opportunities it has provided. For example, by working together, we can strengthen the economy through job creation, being our largest trade, import and exporter as well. Finally, filling the gaps through our economy, especially through the NHS and higher education as well.
Yeah.
So in summary, the graduate labour market in essence wouldn't be impacted as much by Brexit, even with the procurement of British companies. The market naturally is competitive and saturated. This means the labour shift would be more towards lower skilled jobs, evidently from 13% of graduates going into retail in the first 6 months. Brexit won't reinvent the wheel, but they will emphasise and restrict the overall job opportunities. There will be a more intense demand for the high-skilled jobs that are associated with professional bodies and institutions. So thank you very much, Jacob.
Thank you very much, Will.